Let me
Okay.
welcome people. It's good to have you here. I'm just going to turn on the recording. So friends, welcome. My name is Stephen Fetter. I manage the United in Learning program for the General Counsel Office, and it is, as we've been saying, a delight and a privilege to have you with us and to be able to connect this way from all across the country. It's exciting always to see who signs on and where you're from and to remember the length and breadth of the United Church of Canada. We have really been having fun putting together this set of webinars for ministers and church leaders. This is a strange time we're living in, and I hope that the topics that we're choosing and the resource people that we're finding are offering you some opportunity to step back a little bit from the sort of intensity of all of the emergency and reflect on our calling as people in ministry. This is probably the deepest crisis that our denomination has faced in our lifetimes. And deepest crisis that our nation has faced economically and health-wise and all sorts of other ways. And it's important to us at the General Counsel Office to make sure that we're able to connect our colleagues from across the whole nation and talk together about some of the issues that we're facing as we strive to be the church together. Let me talk to you very briefly about technology, and then I'd like to introduce Sue. As you see, we're in Zoom, and I would say if you're watching on YouTube, come and join us in Zoom. You can pick up the link from a United in Learning, or maybe my colleague Aaron could put it in the chat there. We've got 72 people in the Zoom room right now. We've got room for 300. So if you're on Zoom, then we have the opportunity to have a live interactive conversation. If you're on YouTube, you're watching about 30 seconds behind us, and it's just a little harder to loop you back in and pick up the questions when they're relevant. So if by chance we suddenly need the overflow space, that's why it's there. But if we don't, it's much better to be all together in one platform where we can read your questions and you can read each other's questions as we go along. The way that you're going to communicate with us today, and if you've been part of these webinars before, forgive me for repeating myself, the way to connect with us is to use the chat and to type notes to us. So move your mouse over top of the pictures or the PowerPoint, and you'll see the Zoom menu come up at the bottom of your Zoom window. Click the option that says chat, and then type at the very bottom of the chat where it says type message here. Just above where you type, you'll notice there's a little bubble that says everyone. As long as that bubble is showing, then your message is going to go to everyone. But you can change that. So if you see your best friend on the line and haven't talked to them for 10 years, you can send them a private message. Just don't forget to put it back to everyone when you want something when you want to type something that the rest of us are going to see. So that's how it works. If you have questions, put them in the chat. Otherwise, Sue, I should introduce Aaron since he's on the screen here with us. Aaron is one of my colleagues in the General Counsel Office. If you interact with the United Church of Canada on Facebook, Aaron's the one you're talking to, and he's amazing. So he knows that platform better than any of us, and he's doing double duty today when we have these big, enormous webinars and we need someone to monitor the YouTube chat. He's over there watching and then cutting and pasting questions so that I don't have to watch two screens at once. Delighted to have you here, Aaron, and thanks so much for your work and your support in these. Let me introduce Sue. Sue Browning and I worked together on a webinar in the Strengthening Youth Ministry program. We've worked together in various different ways over the years, but that was the most recent one. And then when the pandemic hit, Sue came to me and said, you need to know, I do training for people in critical incident response, and I've got things that ministers might be interested in. Would you like me to do a webinar? So we talked with the Office of Vocations and kind of dealt with getting the political issues sorted out, and I'm delighted to bring Sue in. There's theory and practice and things to think about as we lead folks through a critical incident. Just having some of that knowledge in the background makes it so much easier to make decisions or think about the kinds of decisions that you need to make. I need to say, Sue, since we've talked about this originally, I keep thinking about the things you've taught me as I'm making decisions in my own congregation. So I'm really hoping that the experience I've been relying on in the last 2 weeks will be helpful to everybody else here today too. So without any further introduction, let me turn things over to you, and you can share your expertise with us. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Stephen. Okay, I'm going to invite us all to just take a moment to slow down our thoughts and slow down our breath. And so I want you to notice your feet on the ground, your hands either in the prayer position or on your lap or at your sides. And just very deeply breathe in and breathe out. And again, as slow as you can, breathe in and breathe out. And as you continue to breathe slowly, let us pray. God, we remember that the ancient people had the same word for breath and wind and spirit, ruach. And as we gather this day and slow our breath in the midst of this stressful time, help us to listen, help us to hear with our hearts as well as our minds. Help us to know that we are not alone because you're walking with all of us through this time. And help us to be empowered and strengthened by your presence so that we can bring hope and safety and comfort and peace to those that we work with in our congregations and those we live in community with in the world. And so be with us in this time, O Holy One. Amen. Well, as Stephen introduced me, I wear a bunch of different hats. I am a United Church minister. I've been in ministry for almost 29 years. And I am also a registered psychotherapist and a registered marriage and family therapist and a registered certified supervisor with the College of Registered Psychotherapists of Ontario. And all of us who do this work, because I worked for years at community counseling agencies, we all have to be trained in critical incident responses. And at the former agency that I worked at, I was not only the person who was one of the people that had to be trained, but I became the trainer. So we did CISM, which is critical incident stress management, a protocol created by Jeffrey Mitchell. And then our agency started doing a lot of research because we weren't comfortable with that model. And we designed our own model for how we respond in the midst of a crisis. So I'm going to share with you some of that information of the research that we discovered. And I want to be really clear from the outset, this does not mean you are a trained critical incident specialist. But as clergy, you are always, in the midst of anybody's crisis, a first responder. You are a provider of care. And that is what this, as a leader and a spiritual leader, you're always going to be providing care for people through all numbers of crises in community and in life. And so some of this information will clearly be not new to you because of your previous training, and some of it will also be not new to you just because you've done so much of this in your life and other capacities. But I am going to share with you some research that I think will be very valuable in terms of how we move forward and how we resource ourselves as well as our congregations of faith. So I want to, I'm hoping that this is a bit about me. As I said, I have critical incident response training in a number of different models. I've been doing this since 1995. Wow, I'm old. I am a trained consultant, and I was the regional leader for Crisis Care Network, which is a critical incident response team in the States. I also have training in EMDR, which is a trauma-informed practice in psychotherapy, and I am an ordained minister. So I wanted to start by talking about what are some of the physical reactions that people have when they're going through a crisis. Now, when we say critical incident, we're talking about a whole range of things. We're talking about people having an accident at work or somebody witnessing an accident at work. We're talking about people having a sudden death in their community that they didn't anticipate. We're also talking about responses to mass disasters or community-wide trauma, which is what I would say we're in the middle of right now. And one thing that I always emphasize when I do my training is that there are a number of different physical reactions, cognitive reactions, and psychological reactions, emotional reactions, as well as spiritual reactions. So I just want to name some of the ones that are common, because what happens with a lot of folks is that they will get panicky about some of the things they're experiencing and think it's not normal. In fact, I had a client the other day who had been isolated for 3 weeks, more than that, actually, probably about 4 weeks. And she was having so much anxiety, her chest was really hurting, and she had assumed that she was getting COVID-19. When I told her that one of the features of panic or anxiety, because she didn't have a lot of that in her past, is a tightening of the chest, all her symptoms kind of came down and she didn't feel as panicky. So these are some of the classic physical reactions when you're feeling a high degree of distress or stress. You can become shaky. You can have disrupted sleep patterns. You often have nausea or gastric upset. You can get headaches, pounding headaches that are just related to the stress. Sometimes people can't breathe properly, so they have a hard time catching their breath. Another symptom currently that would make people very frightened. Suddenly you'll have heart rapid rates, blood pressure can increase even though you have no blood pressure experiences. And you can get the sensation of being cold and clammy at the same time, which again might make people feel like, do I have the flu? Do I have this symptom? But this could all be related to stress and anxiety. So those are some of the physical symptoms. Here are some emotional reactions that people often experience when they're going through a very distressing event. Anxiety or panic attacks. I always say that you imagine our emotional regulation like a window, and anxiety brings people up the top end of the window. Depression brings them down the bottom. So with anxiety, you have hyper arousal, rapid heartbeat, hyper. So everything is in that upper end. And I think some of the symptoms we talked about in the physical are the same ones that you would notice if you were having an anxiety or a panic attack. And people who have no history of anxiety or panic attack, in the middle of a really highly distressing situation where there's a lot of information and a lot of chaos and instability, they will start sometimes feeling anxiety, though they've never felt it before. Irritability. I think that all of us maybe have noticed being a little more irritable with our family members or our partners. So this is a common reaction when we're in the midst of a very unpredictable and distressing event. Suddenly feeling very tearful. I can't watch any commercials anymore on TV without getting teary, because so many of the commercials show nurses and doctors and people caring for others, and I find them very emotional. So we're all a little bit more emotional, teary wise. Many people feel a great degree of fear, and that will be accentuated. I'm going to get to this later, but that will be accentuated the more information you're getting. The more news input people get, the higher their anxiety is going to be and their feeling of fear. Some people just feel numb. They go into a hypo state of numbness when they just feel overwhelmed emotionally. And some people, on a very extreme case, will start to have suicidal thoughts, especially those who have had suicidal problems in the past or have conditions like PTSD, like bipolar, other diagnosable mental health problems that come along with suicidality. Here are some of the behavioral reactions that are very common for people. You probably already noticed this because there's a lot of memes going around about, there was one I read the other day about how homeschooling is going not so well because both the students have been suspended for bad behavior and the teacher was caught drinking. That was the meme that somebody sent me the other day, meaning the parent, obviously. So substance use is definitely increasing during this time. I always tell my clients that if you have had a history of substance abuse, you're going to have to really watch it during a time of where a lot is out of your control, because that could easily come back. Often people start to pace, and that is very common when people are indoors a lot and they have that frenetic energy and they need a place to put it. So people will start pacing. Some people just want to avoid completely, and they'll use all sorts of things. Online shopping is an avoidance technique that many people are using right now. A great degree of restlessness. Sort of, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do with my time. I don't know what to do with my hands. I don't know what to do with my thoughts. Hypervigilance is that I saw an interview with Jennifer Aniston the other day, and she said that she had cleaned her house thoroughly 3 days in a row. That would be an example of hypervigilance, right? But there's more severe and more problematic examples of that, where you're on edge all the time, you're easily startled, you want to control a lot of things. In some ways, there can be workplace sabotage. People can start blaming others in the midst of a critical incident or a very distressing event. And then, of course, an increase in violent behavior is also something that often happens when people feel out of control about so many other things that are going on in their life. So then we also have our cognitive reactions. Many people right now are having difficulty with concentration. Their judgment is compromised, because when we have too much distress in our brains, there's a function that happens in which our prefrontal cortex, which is where we make our really good decisions, it actually starts to slow down so that we can be prepared to fight, flee, freeze, or submit. So that capacity, we call it the executive function, is not working as well when we're in a high stress situation, especially one that goes on and on. Difficulty performing normal tasks, intrusive recollections or intrusive fears and worries. A lot of my clients and a lot of my friends are feeling this when they go to bed at night. They close their eyes and then they think about everything that is going on, and they can't seem to stop their brain from these intrusive images or thoughts. Difficulty with multitasking, dissociation. Dissociation, I always say, is there's a scale of dissociation. So there's people that struggle with dissociative disorders, like PTSD has a dissociative component, DID obviously has a dissociative component, but all of us have moments of dissociation. I'll give you an example. Have you ever been driving down the 401 and you're thinking about something at work, and then all of a sudden you go, oh my gosh, did I pass my exit? Have I missed my exit? It was a moment when you were kind of breaking from your immediate reality and moving because of how much you were thinking. And then some people have that in a more extreme way, where they actually feel like they've left their body and gone into a memory or gone into a different experience. So one thing that I teach all of my social workers and my psychotherapists when I do this training is it's really important to be aware that every person's response is unique and individual. There's a wide range of reactions for people when they're faced with something that is very upsetting, very distressing, and all of them are normal. I always say this phrase is such a great phrase. What you're experiencing now is a normal reaction to an abnormal event. And you'd be surprised how quickly people calm down when they know that that's normal to experience this in the midst of something that's very abnormal in our life.
So I'm just going to interrupt you for a second.
Yeah.
Somebody's asking, what is DID? And,
oh, sorry.
It's probably important.
Sorry about
expand our alphabet soup.
Yeah, DID is dissociative identity disorder. It used to be called multiple personality disorder, but it's now called dissociative identity disorder. And yeah, I should have thanked you for saying that. So people that have mental health problems that have a dissociative component to them will experience severe dissociation, but all of us have these little moments where we kind of go someplace else in our mind and we're not in the current reality. That's what I was trying to point out there. So getting back to everyone's response being unique, this is really important to emphasize as clergy, and this is really important for us to emphasize in our own lives and our own families, that just because you're experiencing it this way doesn't mean your neighbor or your child is experiencing it the same way. And so we have to really exercise great self-compassion. Be very compassionate. Don't compare your reaction or your response to other people and beat yourself up because you're not as distressed, or you're more distressed, or you're crying a lot or you're not crying a lot. A lot of people will start judging themselves for being different in their reaction, but we are all human. And so be compassionate with yourself and be gracious with others. A client of mine said recently that her team leader said, this is a time for abundant graciousness. And I think that is really a great expression, that everybody is going through a great deal of stress, and we have to be mindful of that in all our interactions. And so they'll do things or say things that normally they might not normally do, but they will in the midst of this. So I want to just kind of name a few of the spiritual reactions that in the research we see a lot when people come to terms with something so upsetting and so chaotic in life that they didn't expect to happen. That's often what we're talking about when we're referring to a critical incident. We didn't expect when we went to work in the morning that that accident was going to happen, and then it happened and everything got thrown into chaos. We didn't expect that we would now be in lockdown. We didn't expect that. I think many of us didn't expect anyways that the virus would come here with such a vengeance and really disrupt all of our lives. So when anything like that happens, there is a number of spiritual reactions that people have. And I'm just going to put up a few of them. I know there's more than this, but I'm just going to, in the research, some of the things that come up consistently is that people are suddenly aware of their own mortality, which is why often churches are more full, synagogues are more full. People are reaching out to their spiritual communities and their spiritual resources like never before. You folks are probably noticing this with the online worship. I've been checking out different churches, and there's a lot more people that are coming into church online than at least I see on a Sunday morning. And that's because this awareness of our mortality is very evident. Some folks go to the place of really questioning their religious beliefs and their faith practice. They go to that place of how come God can't save us? How come God can't protect us? How can God cause its destruction? So a whole theological reworking can happen for folks. But also in the research, many people experience their spiritual beliefs strengthened, right? God is my rock. I'm praying every day now. I'm getting a lot of resources by my online Facebook community where we pray together. So there is, it's contradictory, right? Some folks experience a questioning of beliefs, but many people in the research experience a strengthening of beliefs. Those who do feel the down swing, they do have a loss of security and the dependability of life and the earth. And some people have a sense of meaningless, but others have a profound sense of what is really important. Again, I'm going to say that these reactions are all normal. And I think it's important as clergy and as spiritual care providers to recognize that we have as many psalms of praise as we do of lamentation, right? So people are allowed and should be supported in feeling like, has God abandoned us? At the same time that somebody else is feeling, oh God, I feel God's presence more than ever before. There will be a range. So I want to just pause for a moment with this section and just say, you know, what came up for you in that, and do you have questions or thoughts that you want to feed into this part of the presentation?
Mhm. So yeah, we'll leave the cameras off if you please, but use the chat and let's collect some questions there. I need to tell you, Sue, it's such a relief to hear that I'm normal. I'm listening to you talk and kind of looking through your list, and I'm going check, 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 check.
I know. I think there's something comforting. There is something comforting about that. And it's
Absolutely.
comforting to me whenever I see a sign when I come to work, because I'm still driving into my counseling office. I see this sign, we're all in this together. And I feel relief when I see that every time. I think
Yeah.
there is something comforting about that.
So, I mean, a couple of people are commenting on that too. You're probably going to get into this later, but somebody's saying, so what if your own issues get in the way of being a minister?
Yes, that's a good question. I am going to get into this a little bit later, but I do think we have to be very mindful of that. I ran into somebody in my neighborhood the other night who works with cancer patients. She's a social worker with cancer patients in the hospital. And she said, normally what my clients are going through is not what I'm going through at the same time. So I'm
Mm,
going through cancer treatment. I don't have cancer and I'm supporting them through that. But now I'm helping them manage their anxiety about this and I'm living it as well.
yes.
So I think there's the wounded healer piece of it that I think is really, I think that's important. I think it's okay for us to name in our sermons that we too feel the fear and feel the distress. I've heard interviews where doctors have been very vulnerable and talked about their own fears, and it's been really reassuring to know that they are also, they're human too. We're all human and we're walking through this together. Obviously, if you're too triggered yourself, you can't be that big of a support to somebody who's triggering you with their own anxiety. We will talk a little bit more about this later.
Yeah, I think that's important. Marilyn is thinking that perhaps we need to be creating space in our worship resources to name some of these things. Maybe this is part of what comes up in the prayers, for example. I think certainly you know, in the prayers of the people that are happening in my online worship, this is what people are naming all the time.
Yeah.
And it's been luminous to see people stepping up to the plate and contributing to the prayers of the people in ways that I've never seen before in face-to-face worship. And it's all the things you're naming, all of those different reactions, all kind of coming out higgledy-piggledy.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So do you find that people are
Oh, go ahead.
consistent with what they're like in normal times? Kate is asking, or I mean, knowing people, because we have this privilege of knowing people. Can you kind
Absolutely.
of sit back and predict and think this person is likely to go in this direction and this person is likely to go in that direction?
Yeah, I am going to talk about that a little bit more. I have to say, though, that we have to be careful about making too many predictions because, for instance, I have a client who has OCD and I was really worried. And one of the presentations of it is a lot of anxiety about germs. And what I was worried about that client. And when I saw that client after not having seen them since this began, I was amazed at how great he was doing. And he said, this is the best I've ever felt. And I said, why? And he said, because everybody else is nervous about germs too. And everybody else is doing what they should do. So he said, I
love that.
than I've ever felt in my life living in community with others. And so it was right. We make assumptions that people that have certain conditions will be worse or this person will be fine. And so we really got to check some of those at the door and just see how we really just got to be open and say, how are you doing? And wait for the answer. There will be certain people, and I'm going to talk about that later, that we really want to be watching in our congregations and in our lives, and how we can watch them. I will talk a little bit about that.
I'm going to get out of the way, but just to flag for you, a couple of people are asking about kids and noticing some of these same kinds of things in children and teens, and are hoping that when you get to strategies, you're going to give us some strategies for dealing with all ages and not just adults.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm going to give you general categories for strategies, but basically I'm going to tell you that the biggest resource for kids are the adults in their lives. And Haim Ginott has a great quote that we are the barometer in our family. So whatever parents can do to not have their, oh my gosh, conversations in front of kids, the better the kids will do. Hands down, hands down. Kids will come through this fine. Kids are way more resilient in lots of ways than adults are, as long as their parents don't infuse anxiety into the children. So you get to talk about your stress and your fear, but talking about it in front of the children and in front of the teens is going to be a challenge. And of course, the other thing is providing space for children to talk about the tough parts of this without saying, oh, it'll be over soon, or it'll be okay. There was a great book years ago written called The Heart of Parenting, and it was by John Gottman, who's mostly does couple and family research. But what he did is research on when parents can emotionally coach their children to manage negative feelings, the kids manage their negative feelings way better. So when children and youth have their validation for the fact that they feel really, I said to my 24-year-old the other day, what's the hardest thing about this? And he got frustrated with me and he said, everything. Why do you even asking me that question? And normally I would get onto the defense about that, right? But I'm like, he needs to just vent about how awful this is for him, that he can't see his girlfriend, can't see his friends. And I said, yeah, this must be really tough for you. And I just let him vent. And so letting children talk about their negative feelings is important, but not putting your feelings into that and having adult time to talk about yours is the best thing I can advise.
Thank you. I'm going to get out of the way and let you go on to the second half, but
yeah,
that captures most of the questions that have been coming up on the chat. Thanks, Sue.
Okay, good. So I want to tell you that in the research that we did when we were starting to look at what kind of critical response we would be providing for the agency I worked at, we looked at a lot of the material coming out of what we found after 9/11. So as you know, that 9/11 was a very distressing, it was a massive distressing event for the whole community, for the whole country really of the United States, but Manhattan in particular. And the other places where there were attacks. And it went on for a long time. It's probably one of the closest things that we've had in North America to what we're dealing with now. Because if you'll remember, it wasn't just September 11th. It was months and months afterward where there was a heightened fear of, would there be more terrorist attacks? And then there was also the anthrax scare and all the fear around that. So the whole society lived in this state of what's going to happen next? Is this going to happen again? Am I safe to go to work? Am I safe to do this? Right? So all of Manhattan experienced, all the people that lived there experienced a fear and distress response. 4 months. What the expectation was of psychologists and politicians was that there would be a dramatic increase in psychiatric illness for people who live in Manhattan within a year to 2 years after 9/11. And what came up time and time again is that that was not the case. That most people did not develop a psychiatric illness, and the increase in psychiatric illnesses was not disproportionate to the rest of the community, except for people in specific groups, such as first responders who had proximate, like saw their colleague walk into the building and then the building collapse. So, and this is interesting research too. My friend and colleague was telling me that this is the same kind of research that we have with refugees and immigrants coming from very distressing and war-torn countries, that most of us have incredible resiliency. The human being, the human species is quite resilient. That's how we've evolved this long. And so we we really are amazingly resilient. And what we learned in the research coming after 9/11 is that most people within 6 months to a year got back to their pre-existing subjective well-being by just making little behavioral changes. So for instance, they went to work a different way, so they didn't have to see the World Trade Center. They didn't have to look in that direction. They didn't open their mail immediately. They put it out and they opened it later when they knew it was safe, if it didn't need to be opened. They checked the news before they left to see if there was anything weird that was going on in Manhattan that day. So these are just little behavioral changes that people made that just lowered, and of course with time, lowered their anxiety, and then they could go back to functioning in their normal way. The same thing is going to happen for us. For 6 months to a year, people will have a heightened sense of anxiety and distress because we've all been under this huge distressing event. But with ongoing behavioral changes like washing hands, staying distance, having hand sanitizer in your car, wiping down surfaces, these behavioral changes for the large majority of the population will help them manage their psychological and emotional distress and will bring it down to a manageable level. The other thing that we know is that ordinary supports, most people in the population recover from even very, very traumatic events like war and terrorist attacks with ordinary supports like time with family and friends, participating in their spiritual community, praying or meditating, talking to their friends, talking to their colleagues. Going to counseling can be a resource, but often, unless you have already had a mental health condition that you needed medication for, just going to counseling without adding medication will be sufficient. And then getting back to as much of your old normal as possible. For the majority of us, not right away, but within 6 months to a year, once things have ended, these resources will be enough. And I want people to know that because I even hear it on CBC. I heard a psychologist the other day who said, oh, we're going to have to, we're going to have so many people with PTSD, so many people with anxiety. And I'm like, no, we're not. The research does not support that. What the research says is, of course, I'm all in favor of providing mental health resources for people who will need it, for sure. But most of us are going to, with our own resources internally and in our communities, are going to recover psychologically and emotionally. Now, there will be people who will be especially vulnerable. And these are the ones that will especially be vulnerable and will definitely need more resources. People who are most proximate to the impact. So doctors and nurses, those doctors and nurses in Manhattan and in Italy, it's going to be very difficult for them, and they're going to have a long recovery trajectory, and they'll need a lot of support, and hopefully that will be provided because they saw in and day out devastating things, and they had to make absolutely horrendous decisions. So that is they will be vulnerable to developing PTSD. People with pre-incident trauma. So if you were a doctor or a nurse that worked during the SARS, and then you maybe didn't even have firsthand experience with this, but just hearing about this reminded you of the SARS crisis, you could be at greater risk of having PTSD. And that's the same, we know that people who develop PTSD also have, if you have had a lot of adverse childhood experiences or really disorganized attachment in your childhood, which means parents that were abusive to you or abusive to one another, you have a higher risk of developing post-traumatic stress disorder. And of course, people with previous diagnosed anxiety will likely take a longer time to recover because the whole society has been in this state of hyper anxiety. And as we all know, the already vulnerable people, so people that are homeless, those living under the poverty level, people in domestic abuse. I should have added here, people that are living with limited resources on very remote reserves. Our local reserves are amazing. They've been so great, and they've provided so much support for the people both living off reserves and on reserves. So it's amazing what's been offered there. But there will be some populations that will, especially those living in poverty and in homelessness, that are going to struggle with their mental health more so than the rest of us will. And this, again, this comes from the research. So I want to hold up that most of us are going to recover. It will take 6 months to a year from an emotional, psychological perspective, once we can get back to a relatively new normal, away from our current new normal. But there will be people that will be more vulnerable. So let's take a moment to, if anybody has any questions about that research and about those things.
So what is ACE? There's another acronym.
Oh, adverse childhood experiences.
Okay, thank you. You can hit us with all the biblical ones. We'll get them, you know.
I know. I'm sorry. I should have.
Psychology ones, we don't know.
Yeah, ACE means adverse childhood experiences. So that's what when I was talking about abuse and either between the parents that you witnessed and you felt really out of control.
It's really reassuring to me to hear you say that you don't think we're going to need huge amounts of psychological help for most people at the end of this. Mm-hmm. That's very encouraging.
Yeah. Well, it is encouraging, and I was shocked when I discovered it myself when we did our own research. I was shocked to discover what came out of 9/11, and because they poured quite a bit of money into the thinking that there would be a huge increase in people with PTSD and anxiety. It really shows you the power of community. It really shows you the power of spirituality, and that, you know, all of these things really help us to be well. Now one of the biggest resources for recovery is connection, which of course we're really compromised with now. But isn't it beautiful the way that people are finding ways to connect, like sitting at the end of the driveway and talking to their neighbor across the way and doing all these online things that you folks that are clergy are doing? I find it really moving that people are just already building up that resiliency by finding ways to connect.
Connection is the big issue with the people I'm working with in my congregation. I almost think we don't need to worship at all. We just need half an hour of chit chat. But of course we need both. But yeah, the sense of being connected is huge.
Yeah.
Beth is saying the driveway visits are rebelling within the rules.
The driveway visits are rebelling, not if you're at the end of your driveway and somebody's across the road at the end of their driveway. Is that rebelling?
I think as long as you're 6 feet apart, you're probably okay. I
was going to say, I guess it depends on how narrow your street is. Our street's pretty well. I'm across from 2 lanes on either side, so I think I'd be okay there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Of course, those are going to shift as we move forward too.
Sure. Not seeing a lot of questions come up here too. Kind of some comments and some appreciation for what you're saying, but not a lot of sort of questions for clarification. And I know you want to get into strategies, so let me.
So let me just emphasize that spiritual community, access to spiritual community, and is a huge resource for people in their whole life. I mean, I often say that if we had a pill that gives the same outcomes as being a part of spiritual community, doctors would be prescribing that pill for people's mental wellness every week. Like, I want you to know that as spiritual leaders, because it is really powerful, both in terms of physical health outcomes, but emotional health and well-being outcomes in general. with the exception of very negative spiritual community where there's a lot of judgment and a lot of fear-based theology and a lot of insular negativity. So I want you to know that because this is really important as we move forward. So the big thing that I wanted to tell you, not the big thing, but all of this I wanted to tell you. When we did our research on what would be the best response for those of us who go into situations, organizations, or communities right after there's been an absolutely chaotic and devastating event, what is the most important thing that the intervention needs to, what's the best intervention is what we started looking at. And no big surprise, when we started reading the literature, there was not one intervention that was recommended as the perfect intervention. There were some that were less ideal than others, but we came across this really fascinating paper. The name of the paper is 5 Essential Elements of Immediate and Midterm Mass Trauma Intervention, Empirical Evidence. If you want to try to say that fast 5 times, I dare you to. It was written by Hopeful and Watson and Bell and Bryant and Breimer and Friedman, a whole list of people who studied a bunch of different interventions after a mass trauma. And basically what they discovered is you have to cover these 5 elements. And they are that safety, calming, self-efficacy, and community efficacy. And what that means is choices. Self-efficacy means that you have some choices, and community efficacy means your community gets some choices in how they face it. Connectedness and hope. So this is if any intervention covers these 5 bases, then it's going to help people recover from a traumatic event. If anything you do covers these 5 bases, then it's going to help people recover. So I'm going to describe a little bit of what some of them look like. So safety, when we talk about safety, we're talking about physical safety, obviously, which we all know now. We have to stay inside. We need to wash our hands, social distance, I hope that message has been really clear. But we're also talking about emotional safety. And we're especially talking about this in this capacity. So what helps people feel emotionally safe? Limiting the news feeds is huge. If you have somebody that you know is highly dysregulated and highly anxious, the first thing I ask them is, how much news are you watching? This is really important because people's anxiety is mostly escalated by the amount of news. And I'm telling everybody I work with, only watch your local news and only watch it once a day, and then turn it off and take care of yourself. Having people around you who are regulated emotionally and talk to you calmly is very important in your own emotional safety. We have this incredible thing called co-regulation. So if I come into a room and go, oh my God, I'm so upset, everybody in the room is going to join me in that intense energy. If I come in the room and I speak softly and I have a non-anxious presence, then people are going to, generally speaking, even if they're up here, they're going to co-regulate with me and they're going to come down. And that establishes a sense of emotional safety. The best thing we can do as clergy and spiritual providers is for our folks to just hear our calm voice. I'm so glad that so many of you are putting your own voice, your own stuff on YouTube and on websites, because I mean, it's lovely that Richard's doing that too, but what your people need to hear is your voice. They need to hear your voice calmly reading scriptures, calmly praying. I'm not saying they need to only hear your voice, but that is making a big difference to people, to hear their own minister praying and talking calmly. That is helping people feel emotionally safe. And again, with this, familiarity. So the things, we've been videotaping our worship services right in the sanctuary and then putting them online, and people just seeing that familiar context is helping them feel more emotionally safe. Calming. So calming and safety, there is some things that are crossover here, but Calming, again, would be a familiar voice, would help people feel more calm. What we know with the calming element is that familiar rituals, familiar practices are really calming for people. People practicing good self-care, which means exercising and because exercise lowers your cortisol levels, and anything that lowers your cortisol levels makes you feel more calm. Creative practices. What we know is that people feel more calm when they have more right brain activity. So I know that some people say this literature is controversial, but I don't agree with it because it keeps coming up over and over again, is that things that cross between the right and the left hemisphere. And we have a lot of left brain activity because a lot of us are very cerebral and cognitive and analytical. But when people do creative practices like music and artwork and dance and creativity, there's a lot of right brain activity in those practices, and people who stimulate their right brain more generally feel calmer in life and overall. Present moment living is very important in terms of keeping people calm. And this is really hard right now because a lot of folks are always projecting into the future. Well, how much longer is this going to last? Well, what are we going to do then? And then what are we going to do? So we're all living with these future outcomes and future predictions that we don't even know how it's going to play out, right? And so getting yourself grounded in the present moment is really, really important in terms of keeping people calm. Really essential. So then there is the self and community efficacy. There's a great trauma researcher by the name of Bessel van der Kolk, who some of you may know if you've read any trauma work, and he has a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And he has this little YouTube video right now that's super funny, because even though he's a brilliant psychiatrist and writer, he is a very plain speaking person. But he says this, and all of us that work in mental health know this: as much as you can, create a routine for your day, because your routine, even if it's only your routine for now, is you making a choice to manage something in your day. And it stabilizes your mental wellness and your spiritual and emotional wellness too. So people who are getting up at 9, and somebody said to me the other day, one of my clients, I have my my morning tracksuit and I have my evening tracksuit. So I put my one tracksuit on when I'm teaching online with my students, and then at the end of the day, I take off that tracksuit and I put on my chilling tracksuit when I'm going to watch Netflix. And I thought, this is a little routine. This is a little structure to her day that she has built in. That is self-efficacy. She's got a choice. She's making a choice over what she's going to wear, how she's going to structure her day. So structuring day, the worst thing ever for people is to sleep in until way later than they normally sleep in, and go to bed way later than they normally go to bed. And those of us with young adults and teenagers, that they are going to do that. So you got to decide what battles you're going to wage with them. But sticking to a basic schedule for your day is really important and is a way to achieve self-efficacy. Make a list. One of my clients is really struggling because people with PTSD, this is very hard for, because usually they've had childhood trauma where choices were taken away from them and they were trapped, or others made terrible choices for them. And so part of what is happening is that it feels, because the choices of not being able, like you're trapped again, right? But this is different. And so making a list, I'm telling people who are really anxious or have previous trauma to make a list every morning of all the choices that you do get to make today. You do get to make the choice of what you're going to eat. You do get to make the choice of whether you're going to go for a car ride and then come back, whether you are going to walk in your neighborhood with safe distances from others. Obviously not if you're sick, but if you aren't sick, you do have those choices. So make a list of the things you can choose. It's a great idea to choose one thing new every day. You know what? today I'm going to call so-and-so, or I'm going to write a letter. I'm going to do something a little bit new, or maybe I'm going to learn how to sing that song, or I'm going to do something that I can learn. Today, I learned how to cut my bangs because my hair was getting really long. Attending church online is a choice we get to make, and participating is community efficacy in that. People putting little notes on their neighbors' doors and saying, I can help you get groceries if you need it. Here's my number. This is community efficacy. Giving to a project, giving to the food bank, calling the food bank. All of these are community choices that we are making, that we can make through this time, and they're really important. Structure in your day, I've said that already, so I don't know why that came in later. And then, of course, connectedness is a big part in helping people cope, both during a mass disaster or a tragic event and afterwards. So nowadays we're having to do this differently. I'm sure how many of you had Zoom calls with your family for Easter dinner. We did. We usually have our whole 19 people around our dinner table. So instead we had a bunch of them on the Zoom screen. And FaceTiming, it is better if you can get a platform where you can see faces, because we are neurobiologically designed to calm down when we see the loving gaze of somebody who cares about us. So if you can do it, virtually is better than just phone. Participating in online support groups. I'm so glad there's so many Facebook groups. I'm usually a kind of I have to admit, I'm usually like a Facebook hater and an Instagram hater. And now I'm like so grateful for these platforms. Texting or calling your friends, sending funny little memes. People are doing that a lot. And churches are finding different ways to do small groups. Like we're going to have a Zoom chat for all the parents tonight to just share with one another some of the resources that they're using to support themselves and their children. These are really important ways in which we're staying connected. And writing cards or letters is also good. Obviously, we want to be careful about licking the envelope. So you can sponge it or tape it and then just say on the back, I did not lick this envelope. My mom is in a nursing home in a small community down in southwestern Ontario. Thankfully, there's no cases at all where she lives, and they closed it way early. But they have this family portal, and every week I'm sending my mom a letter or a card, and every week I check the family portal and I see my mom looking at my card. It's just so heartwarming. So there's so many beautiful ways that people are helping us to stay connected. And this is really important, because our trajectory for recovery goes way up when we have connections with one another. So hope. I mean, you folks and we as proclaimers of the gospel are in the most treasured and valuable position of being able to proclaim the hope and name the hope and live into the hope. So reading scriptures about hope, you can even send a list of scriptures your folks could read, or quotes on hope. Many of you are writing pastoral letters and reflections, holding up the hope for others. These are so helpful. They're so powerful for people. I think that they are so critical. Talking to positive and hopeful people. The people that are not going to do well are people who are surrounded by folks who are especially negative and especially, always looking at how terrible society is and how awful things are. And so that is going to impact them. Our energy is contagious. So if we're with a lot of negative and distressed people, we will bring others down. Singing songs is huge. It's a huge way that we hold on to hope. And I'm always encouraging my congregation when they watch the video for Sunday morning, don't just listen to the song, sing along. Promoting resiliency, expecting recovery. I think in our sermons and in the messages we deliver as clergy, we need to be holding on to the hope. It's really important to say that, God is on our side. God is walking with us through this time. And God has designed us to be resilient people, to be, resourceful, and to be that for one another, right? To carry the light when the person beside me can't carry the light. These messages are really important, and we want to deliver them with the expectation that resurrection is possible, is not just possible, it's going to happen. And it's even happening as we're still experiencing the death and the struggle. This is so important to proclaim. And at first I thought, I was so depressed that we weren't going to be back in church on Easter. And then I realized that, what, this is a very authentic Easter experience for us, because the early church, they were devastated with grief, and they were all in hiding. They were all in social isolation, even after post-resurrection. And these stories, they just had glimpses of these stories, and then they went back into their self-isolation spots before they felt safe enough to come out again. So maybe this is our first really genuine, authentic experience of the earliest Easter. But we have a great faith story, and we want to keep proclaiming it, that we're going to get through this, and God is going to walk with us every step of the way. And always end on the good news. You'll know now that I am. Paul Wilson was the one who taught me how to preach. And he always ended with, every sermon should end on the good news, on what God is doing, on how God is taking care of us. You don't have to do it all. Clergy, you need to hear this, okay? Some of you are already burnt out because you are doing so many things, and you're doing, you've had this huge learning curve of putting your stuff on the web and doing the Facebook group. And I'm telling you right now, you got to be careful, because you are in the front lines in a different way than other people are in the front lines. But I'm telling you now, please take care of yourself and share the responsibility of holding up the hope and being the leader, the spiritual leader of your community, because it will be devastating for the congregation if you do so much that you burn yourself out, and you need to take a big leave of absence when they come back to church and you're not able to be there. So don't be the superhero. Be just your regular self, and ask for help and ask for support, and don't do it all on your own. Okay, so let me just stop there, and then we'll see if anybody has questions or comments about that.
I was going to ask if we could stop there, because that's so helpful, but that's a lot of material. So just, while people are processing that, give us the 5 categories again.
The 5 categories are safety, and in this situation, we're talking about emotional safety, not just physical safety. So safety, calming meaning how to keep people grounded, how to keep themselves regulated. So safety, calming, connectedness, self-efficacy, and community efficacy, which is choices that you get to make when all these other choices are taken away from you, right? There's a lot of choices that aren't available to you, but there are choices of how you're managing your days and how your community's adapting to this. Self and community efficacy, and hope. So
that's so helpful. So there may well be questions, and friends, if you've got questions to put into the chat, please do that. I'm also sitting here kind of listening to Sue and thinking, yeah, this is what I'm doing that addresses that one. And this is what I'm doing that addresses this one. And part of what I'm hearing, Sue, is that a lot of my instincts are already kind of following what you're saying the research suggests. I'm wondering if other people are having the same experience, and kind of what sorts of things you're already doing that promotes calming or proclaims hope or encourages connectedness. It'd be fun to have a kind of list from colleagues across the country about that. And we could generate that in about 2 minutes, I bet, on the chat. So one way or another, either your question or your strategies that you're already finding helpful and fit in this framework. Let's see what we can come up with.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was hoping, Stephen, that this would be affirming for people, because really, all those 5 things is what church is on a good day.
Mhm.
That we can, but I think I was hoping it would be really validating for folks that you already do this, and like just be mindful that this is so helpful, the ways you're already integrating these things. And then there's ways you can just remind people of some things that maybe you're not doing yet.
Mhm. Well, and to acknowledge that the kinds of things we're doing are enough.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to, having been doing them now for 4 weeks, I don't suddenly have to go out and find 10 more strategies. I just need to
No.
keep doing the ones that have evolved. That's
Yeah.
really helpful.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can talk to your people about, that ways in which they can integrate this into their own lives in their own days.
Mhm. To those of you who have to leave early, that's great. And of course, the recording is going to be available at United in Learning. I've actually already put the link there. We're going to carry on for another 25 minutes or so because that's kind of my covenanted time with Sue. And you're welcome to stick around and continue to engage with us then for as long as we're here as well, of course.
Are people sharing their resources, Stephen, about what they're doing to
Yeah,
come up these
I'm
things?
seeing a bunch
What
of
do
them
you
here.
see?
A lot of people affirming the value of worship and sort of seeing the minister and seeing the sanctuary, inviting people to share their activities, volunteering, art, cooking, all that kind of stuff on regular Zoom check-ins. Some people still exploring Zoom, and Zoom isn't going to work for everybody.
No.
I would say about a third, probably 25% of the people who are coming to my worship services are joining in on phone only. They just don't want to try the computer.
Okay.
People making phone calls, finding people are calming down when they have one-on-one calls with the pastor.
Yes.
Senior youth group asked the congregation to send in pics of where they saw Hope last week, and we turned them into a video with music. I did that too. It was so cool. We had about
We did that too.
remarkable what people sent me.
Yeah.
Beth is acknowledging bad internet is a reality in some places.
Yes.
And I think for those places, I've been hearing about pastors who are writing letters, they're sending out things in the mail, they're doing stuff on the telephone.
Yeah.
You don't have to use all the sort of high-tech bells and whistles to stay connected. Telephone's an amazing resource, and
It is.
every regional council has telephone conference call numbers, which you can probably use. Probably not at the same time as the church down the road, but they're
One of
willing
my
to share.
churches is on a dirt road, and lots of people don't have internet. They don't have computers that go to that church. So I've been calling them, and they've been calling. They have a phone tree where they call each other too. We established that as soon as this happened. Who's going to call this person that's really isolated? Who's going to check to see if this person has groceries?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one medium is not going to work for all the people. That's true, Beth, I agree. But you know what? It doesn't in my regular congregational work too. There are people who only ever want a phone call from me, and there are other people who are horrified if I phone them because they prefer I text first and just feel violated if I don't text to make sure that the time is convenient for a phone call. And one of the things this technology does, I think, is vastly increase the number of communication tools, but then I've got to be really skillful about which one I choose for which person.
For sure. Yeah. Because some people shouldn't have your cell phone number and text you because they might use it a lot.
Yeah. Cecile is mailing out stuff, and they've loaned out hymn books as well.
Oh, that's a good idea.
There's no point in having hymn books sit in the pews. Nobody's going to use them there.
That's right.
Everybody who joins in our worship services by telephone has been offered a hymn book, because we can put the words up for people who are watching Zoom, but the people on the telephone can't do that. Bibles
That's
too.
right.
We've got pew Bibles. Some people don't have a Bible in their home. There we go. Cordelia, she got her old CD and DVD burner back out to have the service, send the service out to people who don't have computers.
That's a wonderful idea. I never thought about that.
All of these communication strategies, eh? I've got an old tape player in the office. I wonder if I should resurrect that.
Like a little, like the
probably some folks who would want them.
007 tape player.
There's a thought. let me invite you to carry on, Sue, but there's some great ideas on
Yeah,
this
this
chat.
is
Thanks.
great. These are so important. And I think that an opportunity to share these is really good, Stephen, because people are like, even in this little conversation, we're hearing things that I hadn't thought about before, but are great options. But of course, I'm going to emphasize again, you don't have to do it all yourself. You need, there's other people in your congregation that can support that. I have a lovely young woman in my congregation who's going through for ministry, and she's been doing all our daily devotions on Facebook. So she's been taking that on, and now somebody else is sharing that with her. So this is an opportunity for people to use their gifts. So
I should say in my congregation, we're doing a daily prayer service and I'm not creating it. I sign in at 5:45 and see what Paul has prepared. And
awesome.
we kind of created a format together, but he's doing it all and he's loving it. And for me, it's calming because I don't even have to plan it anymore. So yeah, absolutely. Share it out.
So one thing I'm going to just review at the end is the stress management tips and coping skills. Now, all of these are ones you have heard before, but what happens when you're in a really distressing situation is you forget that these are things you should do to take care of yourself. So I'm going to review them. I'm going to just name them. So try to get proper sleep every night. And I'll tell you a sleep trick. Here's a sleep trick that a lot of people don't realize. If you lay down and you can't fall asleep within 20 minutes to 25 minutes, you shouldn't keep tossing and turning in your bed. You should actually get out of your bed, go someplace else, do something calming like soak your feet, soak your hand, read a magazine or read a book, then try to go back to bed. Because our brains are so much about building association between the physical environment and your emotional state or your cognitive state, that what happens if you can't fall asleep within 25 minutes and your monkey brain is going crazy, your brain then starts to build an association of wakefulness and your bed, right? So this is a big sleep technique. I always tell people, if you can't fall asleep because your brain's too overactive, don't stay in your bed for longer than 25 minutes. So just be mindful of your diet. Don't go on a diet. I'm not saying go on a diet, but be mindful that you're getting enough fruits and vegetables in your day and not just chips. I know more people are buying chips and chocolate milk and things they don't normally, because we're all looking for little treats. Physical exercise. We know that people who exercise every day have better sleep at night. They manage their stress better. And there's some amazing videos online for like fun videos for Zumba and boxing and just and walking is excellent physical exercise as well. They say you should have at least half an hour of physical exercise that gets your heart rate up every day. Surrounding yourself with caring people. I think that's obvious. Expressing yourself, finding places where you can say, this was, the hardest moment of my day, or this is what I'm really sad about. This is what is positive. This is, having people in your life that you can share both your blessings and your challenges with. Setting boundaries. This is important for stress management. There will be some people that will be very distressed and will be calling you all the time. And it is really important to set some boundaries. Otherwise, you're going to get really burnt out and a lot of your energy is going to go to a few people in your congregation. I think this is something that clergy, we struggle with a lot, is setting clear boundaries with folks. I was talking to my friend who's one of my parishioners is a vice principal, and they're like on call all hours of the day. And I said, you got to stop that. That is absolutely unacceptable. You have got to set the boundary that just like a school day, we are not available after 6 o'clock or even earlier, 5 o'clock. So setting boundaries with your time and how much you have available is really important. Music is a great way to, if you play an instrument, play it now. It's really good for your stress. Anything creative. So a lot of people, so many people are cooking, right? And learning new things to cook that they have never cooked before. Art, knitting, these kind of creative pursuits really help people manage stress. Having small achievable goals. This is not the time to remodel your house. This is not the time to do a major renovation. A lot of people think, oh, because I have this extra time now, I should do this, that, and the other thing. people don't realize how much a distressing event takes away their energy, their physical and emotional energy. So this is not the time to do something really overwhelming. It's the time to be cautious of how much output you're putting into your life. Taking some time every day to laugh and play. This really helps. And some of the funny things that are on YouTube, oh my gosh, if you haven't seen the sanitize workout, it's hilarious. Look at the sanitize workout, or the COVID-19 workout, I guess it's called. It's really funny. Going to counseling, all of us that are clergy, we have access to Green Shield, and they have good extended benefits. So you could have a counseling session with somebody that would be covered through your benefits. And I think this is a good time if you're really struggling with your own anxiety or stress. Having an outside person in your life to talk about what you're managing and how you're feeling is very resourceful. All my clients, at the beginning, a lot of my clients canceled. And within 2 weeks, they were all emailing me saying, why did I stop therapy now? That was silly. So therapy can be very helpful. And I encourage you to reach out to somebody if you need some support, and don't wait on that. Spiritual practices, lighting candles, praying, worshiping, all of these everyday spiritual things that we do, like making a gratitude list, these things can be really help us manage our stress. So I'll just hold that up one more time. And because the next slide is my last slide. So maybe some people have other things that they would add to that list.
Yeah, that's a pretty comprehensive list, Sue. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Other things that folks would want to add to that? That's a great idea. Chocolate. I love it.
I gave up chocolate for Lent, and this was the biggest sacrifice I have made for years, because this all happened. I was dying for some chocolate, but Easter was very exciting for me.
Oh, there you go. Hang out with pets and animals.
Yes. Oh, that should totally be on here, because pets are really good for you in terms of managing stress. They say that dogs, some research says that dogs bring your energy levels up and cats calm them down. But I don't know, I had a playful cat that was always bringing my energy up. So not sure how valid that is.
Yeah, someone else is saying singing helps you breathe deeper.
Yes, it does, especially if you do that diaphragm breathing for your singing.
Yes. Yeah.
That's
really helpful list. Thank you.
And put on, I mean, watching funny things, like I know, like people, and now people are following certain Netflix. I think Netflix is a real gift to all of us. Sent me this really funny graph of the importance of things and what was important at the beginning of the year and what's important now. And so the line for internet went way up, and for Netflix went way up, and the line for gas and car went way down. But coffee and chocolate remain stable.
There you go. Paul is asking about funerals and delayed grief.
Yeah.
Any?
That's tricky, right? I know that I just had somebody that died, and they are going to delay the funeral. The parameters, at least on Ontario, are 10 people can come. So some people are not delaying, they're having gravesides with about 10 people and spreading out. And I think that if the funeral is going to be delayed, it's a good idea at the very least for you to call and talk to the family about their grief and about this, because a lot of people who are losing people often are also not able to go into the hospital and be with them right before they die, if they end up in hospital. So I think that at the very least, if we're going to delay a funeral, we want to make a pastoral phone call about how people are managing their grief.
Thank you. I should say to the folks who are on the line, we're hoping that that'll be the topic for next Thursday's gathering.
Good.
We're looking for, we've got leads on a couple of good resource people who can help us think about grief and grief counseling and funerals and online memorials and all of those kinds of things. And so that's the plan, as long as it comes together. It's not 100% confirmed yet, but my goodness, we seem to pull each of these Thursday webinars together in about 3 days. So
That's great.
this has been the fastest I've ever worked to pull webinars together, and that really is the plan, and I hope so, because I think it's an important one. So people are needing to check out. So
Yep.
why don't you show
I
us
need
your
to
last
check
slide,
out
and we'll
soon
draw
too.
this to
So
a close.
here's my last slide. It's just a wonderful quote from Nelson Mandela. We rise every time we fall, and a lot of people have fallen and are in a low space right now, but our gospel story, our faith story is that we will rise. We are people, an Easter people, and it is our human story too. We are resilient, we will rise, and with these things that you are already doing, you're already resourcing your folks, and that's really what the message I want to say today. You are already doing this work. I want you to feel validated. I want you to keep doing it and feel encouraged to keep doing it. But I also want you to take care of yourself. That stress management list was for you. Okay. Really be mindful of taking care of yourself, because there's a lot of extra worry on our shoulders as care providers, spiritual care providers. So please take care of yourself and know you're already doing a great job. And this is just to resource you for support.
Thank you. Thank you, Sue, for your expertise and your ability to tie together the psychological research with the realities of being a parish minister. Lots of people can do one or the other, but you've been able to tie both together in ways that I think have been extremely helpful, and thank you for that. Thank you too for your warmth and your humanness. I mean, it just comes right through the screen. You know your stuff, and you love talking about it, and you talk about your clients and your parishioners with that kind of warmth. It's infectious and it's wonderful. So thank you.
Oh, thank
Appreciate
you.
your work.
Thank you. And Stephen, thank
Friends,
you.
we're going to draw this. Go ahead, Sue.
Stephen is amazing. Like, he really has a passion for resourcing us as leaders, and he is so you're so great at getting these all together in a short period of time, Stephen, and then doing all the logistics of it. It's such a gift. So thank you for your hard work while you're also serving in congregation. You're doing this for our wider church, and we're really blessed to have you.
That's very gracious. Thank you. Friends, thank you for joining us, and blessings on your ministry. What you're doing is important, and it means that our people will survive this well. So may God continue to be with you in the midst of that. I'm going to take Sue out to a private breakout room where she and I can do just a little bit of private debriefing together. We'll let the rest of you get off to whatever else Thursday has in store for you, and look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.